Plague Town. In Carthage, martyrdom drew people to Jesus. Another factor was the radical lifestyle of the early church. When the plague of Galen hit the empire in 165, the pagans left town as fast as their flappy little sandals could carry them. But the Christians stayed behind and tended to the sick. A century later, when another plague hit North Africa, Dionysius of Alexandria wrote, "Certainly very many of our brethren, while in their exceeding love and brotherly kindness, they did not spare themselves, but kept by each other, and visited the sick without thought of their own peril, and ministered to them assiduously, and treated them for their healing in Christ." The church gave the dead a decent burial, laying them out decently. They clung to them and embraced them and prepared them duly with washing and with attire. That's a quote. This contrasts with the pagans, among whom all was the very reverse, for they thrust aside any who began to be sick, and kept aloof even from their dearest friends, and cast the sufferers out upon the public roads half dead, and left them unburied, and treated them with utter contempt when they died, steadily avoiding any kind of communication and intercourse with death, which, however, it was not easy for them altogether to escape, in spite of the many precautions they employed. Ha! In your face, pagans! And don't think that Dionysius is bigging up the Christians either. He's writing about the plague in Alexandria to people who had actually been through it. This is not some kind of PR spin. His correspondents are people who had seen this behaviour for themselves. And those who were cared for by Christians and survived, to whom would they give their allegiance? Not to the pagans who left them to die, but to the Christians who stayed with them. Another way in which the Christians distinguished themselves from their contemporaries was in their attitude to war. Christians were pacifists. Soldiers killed people, and Christians didn't. "We, who were filled with war and mutual slaughter, and every wickedness, have each of us in all the world changed our weapons of war, swords into ploughs, and spears into agricultural implements," wrote Justin Martyr. Tertullian put it with typical force. "But how will a Christian man war? Nay, how will he serve even in peace without a sword, which the Lord has taken away? Christ, in disarming Peter, unbelted every soldier." Another Carthaginian Christian, Cyprian, remarked that homicide is considered a crime when committed by individuals, a virtue when carried on publicly. He was martyred in AD 258. Close to his grave was the tomb of the young Maximilianus, executed for being a conscientious objector. Their enemies certainly knew that Christians hated violence. Athenagoras mocked Christian softies who could not endure to see a man being put to death even justly. He pointed out that Christians turned away from all forms of killing, including gladiator fights, abortion, and infanticide. Around AD 248, Celsus felt able to level the accusation at Christians that, "If all men were to do the same as you, there would be nothing to prevent the king from being left in utter solitude and desertion, and the forces of the empire would fall into the hands of the wildest and most lawless barbarians." To which Origen replied tersely that, "We do not fight under the emperor, although he require it." Christians were told to love their enemies. "Rome grew great," Tertullian said, "not by religion, but by wars, which always injure religion." To him, the laurel crown, the Roman symbol of high honour and victory, was smeared with blood. "Is the laurel of the triumph made of leaves or of corpses? Is it adorned with ribbons or with tombs? Is it bedewed with ointments or with the tears of wives and mothers?" For similar reasons, Christians also refused to serve as magistrates. "We have no pressing inducements to take part in your public meetings," wrote Tertullian, "nor is there anything more entirely foreign to us than affairs of state." Magistrates were the method by which Rome enforced its power, and they did that mostly by sentencing people to death. The early church was not going to do the empire's dirty work. Clement from Greeksville. In Carthage, Tertullian was not a big fan of Greek philosophy, but further along the coast, in Alexandria, some Christians certainly were. Alexandria was the intellectual capital of the empire. You could find schools of every major philosophy in the city, and it had at one time been home to the biggest library in the ancient world, some 70,000 scrolls. Greek was widely spoken here. Welcome to Greeksville, North Africa. You probably couldn't move for hummus. It was also the home of the first Christian Bible college, as it were, the catechetical school. The man who was head of the school was Titus Flavius Clemens, Clement of Alexandria, as he became known. In a town like Alexandria, Clement needed to demonstrate that Christianity did apply to the educated as well as the uneducated. So his writings adopted the philosophical style of the city. He stuffed in quotations from pagan authors to demonstrate his wide reading. He argued that Christianity was the culmination of Greek philosophy. The work of philosophers like Plato was for Greeks the equivalent of the law for Jews. The philosophers were school teachers, designed to bring Greek culture to Christ. Many Alexandrians certainly didn't think much of what they saw as the crude and vulgar stories of the Jews. Alexandria had a strong history of anti-Semitism, despite having the biggest diaspora Jewish community in the Roman Empire. Clement's approach, therefore, was to interpret the Old Testament in deeply symbolic, allegorical terms. These obscure, odd writings held hidden truths, but he had to decode it. This, of course, is worryingly close to Gnosticism, and Clement was pretty friendly to the Gnostics. For Clement, in fact, Christians were the true Gnostics. This made him suspect in some eyes, and is probably the reason why hardly any of his writing survives. That Clement, he's a little too keen on the Gnostics, if you ask me. For Clement, like candidates in the X Factor, we are all on a journey. And that journey continues after death, where he believed the soul will be purged by fire of wisdom. Later ages would rediscover this idea of Clement's and turn his purgation into the concept of purgatory. It all sounds very otherworldly, but Clement wrote about a lot of other ordinary things, from sex to table manners. Most importantly, don't talk with your mouth full. He argued for sensible stewardship of money and resources rather than a literal obedience to Jesus' injunction to sell all you have. And he had a positive view of sex. He did not see it, as many Gnostics had, and indeed many Christians, as innately sinful. But he did believe that it was unnatural to have sex for any other reason than to produce children. So, along with purgatory, he also paved the way for a view of sex that is still current in many Christian circles, notably Roman Catholic today. And, as if that wasn't enough invention, Clement of Alexandria was the first person to call the scriptures the Bible. Well, he didn't actually call them that. The title he used was Ta Biblia, Greek for the books. He was talking about the Hebrew scriptures. But by 223, his pupil Origen was using the word for both the Hebrew and Christian scriptures. So, from Ta Biblia, we get to the Bible.